This is Straight No Chaser Talk Radio. We're just getting started. Straight No Chaser Talk Radio.
He's drinking that with no chaser.
This is Straight No Chaser Talk Radio. We're just getting started. Straight No Chaser Talk Radio.
He's drinking that with no chaser.
This is Straight No Chaser Talk Radio. We're just getting started. Straight No Chaser Talk Radio.
He's drinking that with no chaser.
Welcome to Straight No Chaser, where we never dilute the issues, we only serve the hard stuff. It's the Chief. I'm going to hold it down tonight with our guests. Thinbad and Ambeezy are doing some other things this evening, but we're going to talk about some serious stuff tonight. Folks, we are still waist deep in this COVID fight. 38 states right now are experiencing increases in cases and deaths, and several governors and mayors are either contemplating or enacting additional rollback of activities throughout their cities and states. Masks and distancing are now the flavor of the month, and the country is trying to figure out what to do about school. Will there be high school, college, pro sports? Just exactly what are we going to be doing in the fall? We all have our favorite sport, whether it's high school football, the World Series, college football, the NFL season. Pick one. All are considered American rituals, particularly during this time of the year, as we look at the two-a-days, as the high school football players talk very fondly of, or watching the baseball teams get ready for the postseason. This is an exciting time of the year, but COVID has put a monkey wrench in all that. So tonight, in this COVID world, we want to talk about when will we expect to hear that famous cry, play ball. So this evening, folks, to help us figure it out, as we always do, we have some incredible guests. We have author Theodore Cummings, Esquire, and he has a very exciting book out called Slumber, and this novel is just amazing. It's actually about a pandemic that happens and it impacts the African American community, and it just gets out of control. The world is out of control trying to fight this pandemic. Sound familiar? Yeah, I thought it did. But anyway, I don't want to steal Ted's thunder. So when Ted joins us, we're going to talk about his novel, Slumber. I think everyone will really enjoy it. And of course, our sports analyst extraordinaire and friend of our show, Ryan Adams, from Sports Talk, El Paso, Texas. Welcome to the show, Ryan.
Hey, thank you. Thank you, Chief. It's always a pleasure to be here to talk sports and intertwine our conversation with culture and race and a little politics mixed in. So
yes, sir.
I'm ready.
Yes, sir. So, Ryan, you are in Texas right now. So before we get into this whole sports piece, kind of tell us what's the lay of the land in Texas right now.
Well, as of right now in Texas, the focus at this time of year, of course, is high school football, which is the state religion. Every small town, from El Paso to Odessa to Midland to Monahans to Pecos to down south in the Rio Grande Valley, up north in the Panhandle and Amarillo and Lubbock. And as you go east to Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston, San Antonio, and Beaumont, football is supposed to be in the air right now. Unfortunately, due to this pandemic, the powers that be are wrestling with how to proceed. The UIL, which is the governing body for high school sports in the state of Texas, issued a statement saying, basically, and I'm paraphrasing, that schools may have team workouts, et cetera, et cetera. There was no concrete yes or no from the governing body, and that leadership is mirroring the leadership at the state level and at our national level, because it seems like no one wants to drop the hammer. They just want to pass the buck and leave it to the individual school districts as to whether or not they're going to have workouts. The large school districts here in El Paso County have suspended preseason workouts for their fall teams. And I believe that's a very good decision. And we're still wrestling with when are we going to have kids back in school in a brick and mortar setting. And so, I can speak for my wife. She won't be back in the classroom probably until September, and they'll be doing activities on a virtual basis. But the mood here in Texas is pretty somber, because there's a strong possibility that we may not have a fall sports season. And that's going to, from an economic standpoint, I talked about those small towns. They depend on that in the fall, because Friday night, everybody's at the game. And all of the ancillary industries and service providers that feed on that football frenzy here in Texas. Well,
one of the things that I've really wanted to know is, how do the parents feel about that? And I see that we have Ted has joined us. So before we get to Ted, I just wanted to find out, how do the parents feel about this whole situation, Ryan?
I think the parents are going to put the health and safety of their children first.
That's good.
I love football. I live for this time of year. And of course, I do play-by-play high school football here in El Paso.
Sure.
And I believe that the majority of parents are going to put their children's health and safety first. And if that means not having football this fall and maybe delaying the season or not having it at all, would be a step in the right direction. So that's just based on the conversations I've had here with some of the parents.
Sure. Wow. Well, I look forward to talking a little bit more about sports, but we have to set this thing up because it's just so ironic. And I have to share with the audience that Ryan was telling me about Theodore Cummings, and he was saying, hey, man, we have a fraternity brother that's just a dynamite author, and you really need to hear this guy's story, and this book he's written is just amazing. So we were able to connect, and I have to tell the audience, this novel, and he's written several novels, and we're going to allow him to talk about those things, but this novel, Slumber, is just so close to what we're going through now. It's almost like this guy had an epiphany years ago and said, let me get this on paper, because someday people are going to say, man, are you a prophet of some type? So as I told you earlier, audience, we have Theodore Cummings, Esquire, but he prefers to go as Ted, and we're going to call him Ted. And he's written, one of his books is a book called Slumber. And it's a black science fiction novel that takes place in post-apocalyptic America, in which a mutated virus devastates America. Millions become infected and succumb to the virus. As a result, the country is in chaos. And so the remaining population must decide how and if it can survive in face of the many obstacles and the many enemies. Now, right now, the biggest obstacle that we have for COVID is sitting in that building in D.C. and some of the folk that are in charge of keeping America safe. But that's another 12-hour show. But, Ted, thank you for being on the show, first and foremost. We are just so happy to have you here.
I appreciate it.
Yes, sir. And I have to ask, what gave you that vision to write Slumber? Because, man, when I read the description, I was like, you got to be kidding me. This must be a setup. This is too good.
So great question, man. So here's my sort of bit of convoluted answer. I began writing Slumber 6 years ago. And Slumber
Wow.
is book one of a 6-book series that I'm calling the Sleepers book series.
Mm-hmm.
And Slumber is book one. I'm
Wow.
currently working on book 2, which is called Awakening.
Okay.
But 6 years ago, man, believe it or not, I'm a full-time attorney and I've been that for a long time. I'd taken a bit of a break and went into the classroom to teach 7th graders in an inner city high school situation. And I taught those kids robotics and computer science.
Wow.
So I was literally teaching them to program languages. Shouts out to Howard University, Bachelor's of Science in Mechanical Engineering.
All right. HU.
So yeah, so I'm teaching these kids, man, and I had the expectation that, listen, if 50% of these kids accept what it is that I'm teaching, I would have considered it success, right? Because we all know the bad stories, the incredible, awful stories we hear about inner city high schools and all of that. But I was pleasantly shocked and surprised, man, because upwards of 95% of my kids who I taught, and it was 100 kids per year for the 3 years I was there. 95% of that 100-person crew, was capable and able to receive my instruction.
Okay.
And so, right. And so when my epiphany was, wow, these Black kids from these diverse circumstances are brilliant and they're able and they're capable. What would life look like for them if they did not have to deal with systemic racism?
Sure.
Right. What would their lives look like if many of them did not come from really distressed home situations, as brilliant and bright and wonderful as they are? What would life look like for them if all of the disadvantages that, loaded on them literally in the womb never occurred or never happened? Right.
Sure.
And when I started asking those questions, and these are very existential, when I started asking those questions, I broadened the field a bit. I was like, well, you know what? What would life look like for Black people in America if, for example, slavery had been cut off at the end of the Revolutionary War, which, as you know, historically was an actual possibility, right?
Sure.
What would life look like for us as a people if Jim Crow had never happened and we had not had 90 years of straight up terrorism targeted against us and non-voting and no equality and so forth? What would life look like for us? And so as I broadened the field and I asked myself these questions, a story sort of got dropped into my spirit. And that story looks like a reality where we as Black and brown people in this country do not have to deal with the daily strictures of white supremacy and racism to the extent that we do today. And then so the basic idea is get rid of white supremacy and so forth. And I thought about how to do that, right? And from a background perspective, guys, I mean, I'm a scientist and I'm a science fiction guy, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I grew up reading comic books. I'm a Star Wars, Star Trekky guy. That's who I am and like the stuff that I enjoy.
Okay.
So my story became a science fiction. The vehicle was science fiction to look at what life would look like for us if, societal racism, structural racism, were removed. And 6 years ago, guys, I was telling Ryan, I was not at all a writer of fiction. Because I'm a lawyer and I'm a patent attorney by training, I'm a writer by profession, but that's technical writing. That's not fictional writing.
Sure.
So, I mean, honestly, man, it took me 6 years to do the story, develop, and to become a good enough writer, to publish what I believe is a good story. And I've always said about Slumber and about this series, I know the story is good, right? I know the story is potentially fantastic and compelling. The story is only limited, however, by the proficiency of the writer, right? And so, my job over the last 6 years has to become, try to become a pretty good to good writer of fiction so that the story is not impeded.
Sure. And when you look at the premise of your book, knowing the effort that you put in it, let me go back for a minute, knowing the effort, the research, and all the things that an author does for a book. And when you look at what state of this pandemic culture is right now, how does that make you feel to know that you sort of nailed it 6